Okay, everybody, welcome back to SJJMAS number 27 with Doooovid. SJJMAS with Doooovid. SJJMAS with Doooovid. SJJMAS. SJ. Anyway, bear with me. Okay, now I've stopped that. Right, so we've got Doooovid here, everybody, for number 27. Thank you for coming, Doooovid.
Okay, praise the Lord, Stephen. Thanks for the invite. I haven't. I stopped my week in review. I haven't been streaming that much. If you want, we could talk about that. Explain why. And I didn't even notice that you were doing this till you reached out, and you know, like I kind of fell out of the streaming world. I watched your Luke Ford in his reply, and I caught a little bit of Brundle, and I'm still in the X spaces a little bit, but you know, glad to see you active. Good to see your success.
Thanks, bro. I mean, it started as a joke. I didn't know where it was going to go. There's that phrase, isn't there, from the movie Field of Dreams? If you build it, they will come. I just started and people started showing up, so...
Well, 20 seconds pretty high. I mean, I don't know if you're going to keep it going past Christmas. You might even get to 50.
I have a big guest booked for tomorrow. I've hooked as a whale for tomorrow, everyone. The iconoclast is coming on, who used to have 200,000 YouTube subscribers before he was brutally kicked off by, I don't know, let's blame the ADL.
I'm not even sure I heard of him. And I got to admit,
yeah,
I was looking at Millennial Woe's guest list, and I had only heard of like 5 of them total. You know, like you know, like 75% of the names I never even heard of before. You know, they're like the alt-right or the movement. You know, I guess it goes on, but you know, since Luke Ford stopped talking about it, or like I haven't streamed with you, and the delocalization to all these different platforms, you know, it's tough to follow. And then even this, like, you know, if we were still doing weekly streams, like maybe I would have tried to listen to the majority of these just to figure out who different people are and what they're saying is. But once you're out of the network, it's just too difficult to keep up with you know, all the different influencers and media personalities, in unless you're having interactions or some sort of meaning to, you know, to these interactions, or you know, you're part of a greater movement. And the only movement I've really been part of since the last time we talked, and even when we're talking, I guess, is like an anti-Zionist activist. So like I'm still involved in some of my intellectual activity, but yeah, I still pop on streams, or mostly X Spaces, as an anti-Zionist activist, independent Jewish scholar.
Yeah, I mean, a lot's happened since we last talked. I felt like, I don't know, I just fell away from covering the Israel stuff all the time. I honestly got a bit bored of it. I feel like the audience probably expended the audience's interest somewhat. I know, obviously, you're deeply interested in all things Jewish, so. But why not?
There weren't regular important updates, especially, you know, in the UK or something, and you know, it's just like a new ICC case, or even the pager attack. I mean, you probably could have made a stream, people, but it doesn't really matter that much to, you know, your average Brit or people caring about white interest. Besides the fact that like your governments are, you know, implicit in it against your will.
You know, the biggest thing my audience thinks is, what is SJJ doing streaming with Doooovid? What does he have divided loyalties? What the heck is going on? Nobody can figure it out. Doooovid, when you saw some of the stream with Luke Ford, why do you think he kind of had an aneurysm towards the end of that stream? What did I do wrong?
Well, I mean, it's probably his own personal cognitive dissonance of not being able to come to terms with his past, which like a similar, like, you know, just like if someone like, oh, Luke Ford, like, you know, like I got turned on to pornography through you. and that's not the image that he's putting forward. Maybe that was never his intention. And certainly with like the alt-right or all these people, all these issues where he's completely tried to turn the page, reinvent himself. So just too much dissonance to be like, do I even know you? Like, why are we talking? Do we even have anything in common? And then especially you're asking him all these like questions on the Jews, where he's like, where he's forced to give different answers than like the last time you spoke. And
I wasn't planning to like stump him on this. I just thought, wow, this is Luke's wheelhouse. He's talked about it like for 5 years about Jews and their involvement in the alt right, and I just
I
thought,
mean, he just
I honestly
reinvented.
thought I was softballing him.
No, I'm saying he just reinvented himself, and he really had nothing for you, and it was probably like difficult, like he said, like every answer, he's like, I guess like walking on eggs. That she has to be extremely careful, and he probably hasn't came to terms. Like he basically is like pulling a frame game's Mike Benz in the sense
Well, so
like
you're saying he was deeply enmeshed in the alt right? Yeah, he was sympathetic to it, and now he's trying to claim, no, he always kept it at a distance.
yeah, I mean he's not quite like Mike Benz. Like obviously he's now one of the most famous people in the world, and at the middle of power, he's got Elon Musk constantly retweeting him, Tucker Carlson, Tim Pool, but just to pull that it was a psyop. Like he never believed any of the stuff. The purpose was a psyop in order to get people to like the Jews more. And Luke Ford's probably, I mean, he's not quite going that far, but he's saying like, he's like, Piers Morgan, like, I'm just a journalist. Like, I was covering because no one else was covering it. And I mean, if you first, we just, talk Luke Ford because that's how we know each other. And,
Yes.
he's also my kind of rise into streaming. And I guess also because like most of my streaming had nothing to do with like the alt-right or the JQ. That's just what I was most popular for. And that's why I stopped streaming, because like it was just me reading papers or Church of Entropy. We even stopped doing week in review, and then just like me reading papers or talking about philosophy, and my audience like dwindled to like 3 people. I mean, a few people would watch and like, yeah, great book on tape. Like, I listened to your show and I like the topics you talk about, and it's basically just like a book on tape. But I was, and most of the people that I spoke to, we weren't really friends. They just wanted information. I mean, so if you want, I'll give an update on kind of like the alt right, the JQ. But well, first, like Luke Ford, kind
Yeah,
of like,
let's gossip about Luke Ford first, because I mean
yeah, kind of like
that's
Elon Musk. But
what people
I
want.
mean, Colin Liddell was defending you, or you're saying Elon Musk is really an anomaly. No one really knows. Because he's a public figure and there's so much information, anybody could hypothesize. But like what Elon Musk's motivations are, why he's doing what he does, no one really knows. So Luke Ford
Yes.
also, what's motivating why he's doing what he's doing, no one really knows. And now his answer is kind of, now he's kind of saying he was just kind of like crying out for help. He was hoping like the more people noticed him, he would get more help. But like, obviously, like he was, when he like he had the most controversial people on the internet before. He was basically like the only one interviewing these people. Even like that's why me or you or anyone tuned into him, not necessarily because you cared about Luke Ford, but because you wanted to hear like what Mike Enoch or Richard Spencer or Kevin McDonald, or like he had almost the exclusive interviews with these people.
The
And
best interviews, the best in my opinion.
well, even the best, the only ones, or the only like non like where it wasn't just like alt right people
You
talking
know,
with each
you,
other.
you know what it was? It was the fact that somebody outside of the circle was asking him questions. Wherever we put Luke Ford, he definitely wasn't. It wasn't a Wignat, and the fact it was a non-Wignat asking questions made it a better interview. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so we have no idea why Luke was doing what he was doing, besides the fact, like, okay, even his Wikipedia says he, it's narcissism and Hollywood self promotion. So in the sense, like, he wanted to be famous, he wanted to make a name for himself, he wanted to make a living, and the most obvious, like that he started streaming after he was on Warski, and he saw the money rolling in, And even he himself was like, after Warski, he basically started streaming every day, and that was enough to get him like 100+ daily live viewers for hours, and he was getting super chats, and
Yep.
so it was basically like haphazard. He didn't necessarily plan on doing it, and because he got his big break on the Warski show, um, like he said, he narrowcasted to talk about the topics that he knew other people weren't talking about, and that he could build an audience doing. And that, like, he switched away from pornography. So he decided, like, the alt right, it's a big issue. It's rising. It's a niche type thing that has an audience, and there isn't much competition. So, a bunch of people like me and you tuned into Luke Ford because he was the only one covering, this topic. And for a few years, he built an audience. Um, and then at some point, my original claim was like Brundlefly, that he knew, like, as an Orthodox Jew, he can't really, like, his audience was largely like anti-Semitic, and people that just wanted bad information about Jews, or to hear the debates. But he didn't really have that many Jews tuning into him. It was mostly counter Semites, and most of them were just like, when you're going to get Mike Enoch on again, and or one of these type personalities. And he was able to develop some sort of base. But I guess, being in Hollywood and understanding media, he knew he had that network and the connections. So he kind of created Brundlefly for that, which is just like, I can't keep on doing this. I can't keep on platforming people and hosting this. So, but he didn't want to completely give up, whatever media accomplishments he had done by creating that audience. So he tried to spin off Brundlefly, and that probably, I don't know if it backfired, but from just telling people what they want to hear, to where, people like you and Brundlefly.
Wait, are you saying that Brundlefly was his Chabos goy?
Well, I mean, so the either okay, so there's two elements that a lot of Jews were part of the alt right. A lot of Jews are racists and do prefer white people, anti-immigration, and the original Trump camp, like Richard Spencer, they were like, yes, like what you were saying, like, yes, absolutely, Jews should team up with whites. Jews should try to stop the demographic change. Jews lot is best off with European people. So, like, there's unquestionably a reasonable segment of Jews, maybe even like 10-20% of the Jewish population in the US, UK, that feel like that, especially um, Jews that aren't part of organizational Jewry. Like, the identity question is, if you don't really feel that Jewish, you're probably going to fall into some sort of, well, what am I? I'm white, I'm European. And so Luke Ford probably had that sentiment. However, almost all organizational Jewry has the exact opposite. Like, almost all organizational Jewry is like, we're not white, we're Jewish, and you're promoting multicultural and immigration, and all these various things. So Luke Ford, in the beginning, he might have been like a Halsey right wing Jew, and he thought the right wing Jews might win. And he thought, like, the Jews might wake up and realize that immigration into America is not that good for them, and multiculturalism isn't good for them, and they should be pro-white. And so, I mean, that's possible. And then at some point he saw, like, that's not going to happen. Like, even his right-wing Orthodox Jewish friends in Hollywood are still basically pro-immigration multiculturalists, kind of like the modern Trump party, that, like, Luke's actual Jewish friends might, behind closed doors, say pretty racist things, but, like, politically, they're more like Vivek Ramaswamy Republicans. And so he had to get off that ship, you know, as the crackdown. And then he got, also got strikes on his YouTube channel, and his money making uh, ability off of it wasn't really happening. So he changed ship, and then his friendships with Brundle were untenable, because maybe he had that kind of racist, pro-white element, and he was kind of hoping that the whites would win. And he was leading people like Brundlefly on, like we talked about at length on your show multiple times. And then at a certain point, Luke Ford just bailed ship, and rather than, saying that he's a reformed racist, he just pulled the frame games. So he could have said like, yeah, like, I mean, he could have pulled like a Richard Spencer, the reformed racist, and like personally, like, I don't know what's in Luke Ford's heart, but I think it's more likely the reformed racist. But I'm saying he's not really going to go down that attitude, so he's just pulling like frame games to say like, okay, Brundle, Steven, we were never really friends. I kind of like you guys, but like I was just promoting this stuff. You know how Hollywood works. It didn't work out, so like I can't have anything to do with you anymore. You got to understand.
He's maintained the HBD line, so I think, look, when
But the Vivek
the cough,
Ramaswamy Trumpism or like Tucker, in the sense he's still right wing. He still might.
still right, yeah, but HBD isn't Tucker or any of that. This is like when Coffness appeared on the scene, and it was this Jewish guy giving a critique, giving an answer finally to Kevin McDonald's Culture of Critique. But also Coffness is one of the HBD crowd guys. Human biodiversity, if people don't know what we're talking about. Basically, Luke Ford repackages it as different people have different gifts, and we can say that these are down to biology. And so he's kind of maintained that line all the way along, and I feel like that's because it's given an acceptability through Nathan Coffners and his associations. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean that's probably more accurate than the direction I was leading it. Like Luke Ford is basically like a Coffness Amy Wax type figure that wants the Jews to team up with the whites. He believes in some form of meritocracy, and he thinks like Jews are you basically deserve what they have. Like, I mean, there might be some problems of group conflict, but like generally Jews are smarter and work harder, and they get ahead. And the alt-right main mistake was not being friendly enough to Jews, and Jewish mistake was not recognizing the necessity of like the Jewish white coalition enough. But he can't even say that part, so he can't really be like an Amy Wax, like although that's probably kind of how he feels. And so like Nathan Coffness, is still his protege that he's kind of like hoping will become more popular. He would probably still like to be like an American Renaissance Uns type Republican right-wing Jew, but it didn't really work out that way. So he just, now it's not even clear like what he represents. He's not really part of a movement. So now he's just an independent political commentator that, I mean, he's still there. He still has ideas, but like, you had felt like he was on the forefront of a movement. He was bringing you new things. He was pushing new ideas. And that's what he said, like, okay, the alt-right, like, he puts it to like the Coffness critique. And I'm not even sure like the sensical, like, because that, if that's kind of like a sign where he said, well, the main problem with the alt-right was their anti-Semitism. And that's what he meant by the Coffness critique, or if he literally meant it like he said it, where like, no, the alt-right went wrong because they didn't recognize that Coffness was right. What does that even mean? That like the alt-right didn't recognize that Jews deserve to be dominant in the West because Coffness is right, and therefore, like the alt-right would have been more successful if Richard Spencer had chosen a bunch of like, Halsey type Jewish generals to lead the movement. And I mean, so it wouldn't surprise me if that's really what he thinks. But he's not straight up saying that. And whatever the case is, like that just puts him in too much of a distance. So he's like, just like me, like I'm an anti-Zionist. So most of my Jewish friends are just like, we can't be friends anymore. So, that's kind of like Luke Ford, he's looking at his scenario right now. He's looking at like you and Brundle, and it's like, we just can't be friends anymore. It's not practical. It's not practical for me and my success. Maybe we were friends in a different scenario, in the past, maybe that was legitimate, maybe not. But like, do me a favor, help me out. Like just recognize like we can't be friends anymore. I got to move on with my life. Please don't make it difficult on me.
Yeah, let me say this. I mean, I don't know if he'll ever come on the show on my channel again.
I don't think you wronged him in that sense. I think it was just practical. Where it was like he didn't. It just like
I thought I was softballing him.
Practicality, like we can't be friends anymore. I'm sorry, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, at once and the same time, he's acknowledged to me that he thinks it was a great interview. But then, like, he coped about it on his stream for about 20 minutes. And in essence, what he was saying when he went on his stream. So if any of you haven't watched it yet, go and watch the last hour of my interview with Luke Ford. It went from it's my fault for turning turning it from just being like, I don't know, talking about nonsense, shooting the breeze. Basically, we could have been talking about the weather for the first hour. And then I thought, oh my God, well, look, let's get some substance out of Luke. Luke's been dealing with the alt-right since forever. He's the guy who first broached what are Jews doing here in the alt-right question. Let's talk about it. And I think what it was touching on, like, you know what is acceptable about Nathan Coffness and the HBD stuff is it's all about individualism. But what I was asking is what are group motives? And Luke seems to now be unable to touch that question with a barge pole about group motivations. He will deny it to your face that there's any such thing as group motivations, basically. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, so he just notes kind of like characteristics, like general, like Anglo or Jewish character traits. So how if you're dealing with a Jewish individual, they might display these characteristics, but whether that means that people act as a group, that he would largely reject. So, like, I mean, if that's what he means, that like Coffness is saying Jews rise to prominence due to individual Jewish excellence, high IQs living in urban areas, but not due to any collective Jewish behavior. And so, in that sense, that's at least the line that Luke is going to toe. That Coffness, like any individual Jew, even though they might go to shul together or share these common beliefs, that's not what helped them rise to excellence. It was their individual excellence that rose to excellence, and then kind of diverting the JQ, and then the question, well, like the whataboutism, to saying, well, what about Episcopalians or other people that have these similarities to Jews? So he's kind of defending the JQ to a certain point, where and maybe he was also like a contrarian, like before it was dangerous, where Luke Ford was kind of pushing the JQ in 2016 because it wasn't really that dangerous for so he could forward the arguments of anti-Semites, counter-Semites, because it didn't feel dangerous for him and his Jewish community or the Jewish community at large, because like anti-Semitism wasn't really dangerous for Jews at that time. And then I guess Colin Nidell's defense of you, because then he's also kind of like, well, these guys are kind of just like losers and have no effect, and 99% of people who get involved with this are making their life worse, comparing him to like OnlyFans models. And so Colin Nidell was kind of like defending that, like, no, like people like Stephen James, like there's demand, there's legitimate questions, there's legitimate problems that needs to be given a voice to. And like, although the leaders of the alt-right, many of them are problematic, they're not just like losers or ruining their lives, like and certainly like possibly with the rise of Trump, some of the talking points of anti-wokeness or immigration, the character identity of the West has taken the mainstream. So that wasn't, and you didn't go down the line like, Luke, just his opinion, like maybe the people he followed kind of faded into oblivion or like Nick Fuentes, the Groyper, but he didn't seem to. You mentioned like Keith Woods or even like people like Greg Johnson or people that are still at it, or like Millennial Woes. Like, I'm not following the movement, but I assume that the 80% of people on Millennial Woes, Millennial U or whatever, are people who are legitimately like pushing forward and doing things, and I'm just not following because I don't know what they are, who they are, or what they're doing. And then there's also kind of like, well, unfortunately, White's lost. Like, I mean, when I came in, I was like, of course, White's lost. You lost a long time ago. Like, even thinking that Trump was going to possibly save you was like, I was saying that in 2016. no, like whites lost a long time ago. Like you're never getting your countries back. Um, but like there was still that slight hope in 2016 that like Trump or whites might take the country back, and so now at this point, like there's basically no hope. No one in the dissident alt right, pro white movement thinks that they're going to get America back, uh, and maybe even in the UK, they're certainly the situation has gotten worse, and
Right, okay. Well, let me ask you then directly, David. Why, if Jews are so smart, this is the question I asked Luke. I wasn't accusing Jews. To be clear, I was not accusing Jews of being responsible for the demographic collapse, for the demographic change, for immigration. I was not doing that. What I was saying is, if Jews are so smart, why aren't they teaming up with white people to protect their position as like the at the top of the ruling class? Jews have never had it so good in America. They're basically worshipped by white people, put on a totem pole. They've never had it so good. And I likened it to the scorpion and the frog. If they're so clever, why can't they see the demographic collapse coming and thinking, holy shit? I mean, even if there's like, I know whatever you're going to tell me, middleman opportunities.
Like some goy for failing to understand that. Like no, like multiculturalism, immigration is in Jewish best interest. And
yeah, but hold on. If you're going to tell me it's the middleman, it's good for the middleman.
Jews, like immigration, multiculturalism, bad for Jews in Israel, but it's not bad.
Here we go.
UK. It's good for Jews in the UK, in the West, in America. It's only bad for white people.
Yeah, but it's such short-termism. I mean, you can't predict the future. You can't predict the future.
Multiculturalism and immigration is good for the Jews. Like I don't know
why.
What part of your dumb goy head like don't you understand that
because
it's bad for you, it's not bad for the Jews. It's good for the Jews.
Why?
You honestly think that somehow multiculturalism and immigration is going to be bad for the Jews in the West?
Well, I'm asking the question. Surely it's a risk. Surely it's a fucking risk, Doowood. That
it's a risk for you. How's it a risk for Jews?
Because Jews have never had it so good at the top of the totem pole in America, and you're putting everything on the line to hope that you'll somehow be able to, like, I don't know, keep being the managers of society once you've brought in the third world. It's not guaranteed.
Well, nothing's guaranteed, but it's saying, like, okay, the Jews only have it so good now because of 50 years of immigration and multiculturalism, and Jews remember pre-1965 when they were part of a white majority, the difficulties. Like, okay, maybe Jews still had wealth and to some extent, but like no, it was very difficult for Jews when it was just Jews and whites. And now Jews are at the pinnacle of their power. I mean, if you look at it like, just basic, like Nick Fuentes, like your average white person saying like, we should be running our own country. We should be running ourselves. We don't want Jews in charge of us. So 75 years ago, when whites were a super majority in every urban area, Jews had very little power. There was zoning, there was redlining, there were all sorts of clubs that didn't allow Jews as members, and it was like that in almost every major area. Like even New York City, you had your Gentile white clubs, law firms, businesses that they sidelined Jews, and now there's not a single major urban area in America that's still majority white, but Jews and Jews are dominant in most of these areas. Like, okay, Miami, Chicago, New York, Baltimore, Los Angeles. That I mean, the Jews teamed up for the first black mayor in Los Angeles like 60 years ago, in order to because they felt they weren't getting a fair shake from white people. They were being forced out of power. That white people didn't allow meritocracy because they didn't want to be ruled by Jews. And that's the multiculturalism that's changed that. So yeah, certainly like Jews face violence and crime. Like okay, because Jews live in most urban areas, and you have the immigration, and that's why you have so many Jewish alt-righters, because that's what Colin Liddell was saying. Most of the racism from whites are coming from multicultural urban areas. So most of the Jewish racists are people who are, they're tired of getting beat up by blacks. They're tired of multiculturalism. They're tired of all this Islam. But overall, for Jewish power, it's good because it's diminished the main competition to Jews was whites, and the main weapon that whites had in keeping Jews out of power was by their supermajority. So it seems just obvious without like a Keith Woods type thing that that the continued more multiculturalism, more immigration will continue to benefit Jews in the West. In Israel,
So your position is that the Great Replacement, and we've got to be careful because we're on YouTube. Even though you are Jewish and you are espousing this, you're telling me that the Great Replacement, God forbid, is it an
caused by
organized
Jews? You're saying a conspiracy theory that Jews are orchestrating.
Is it an organized conspiracy?
Well, I mean, if you're saying that the conspiracy, like the Great Replacement, like you're being replaced by Jews, is different than just saying that that the continued demographic change and decrease of white majority.
Yes, that's what we're talking about. The loss of whites becoming a minority in their own country. That's the thing that the dissident right is here to talk about. That's what we all care about.
My main came on. Like my main issue from the beginning was always defending immigration. Luke Ford at the beginning was like an anti-immigration activist, and he was basically like a racist. The first time I talked to him, like he asked me all these questions, like, aren't blacks just violent? How can you get along with blacks? How can you live with blacks? And so that kind of like Luke Ford, the reformed racist, he's not portraying himself that way. But certainly there's a lot of Jews that agree with him in that there's a lot of Jews that are racist or think that look at all the problems, like that there's a lot of problems with non-white minorities, that in some way whites are better, but like overall for Jewish safety and Jewish power, the continued demographic change. And Luke Ford himself used to say, every single Jewish organization in America, there's not a single Jewish organization in America that's anti-immigration. And the Trump ban, like even with Muslims, even the thing that possibly would benefit the Jews most, basically every major Jewish organization spoke up against Trump's Muslim ban. And like the right-wing Jews in the Trump administration, like are basically pushing back against immigration. Like the connection, and like I know as a Jew, the issue that American Jews care about most is immigration, even more than Israel. Like you look at the polling, you're like of anything, of all the issues that Jews care most about, it's immigration. And you could say different reasons, but Jews don't necessarily like looking at it purely utilitarian. Where like, okay, we're supporting immigration because we want to feel safe, or because we want to lessen the competition for whites for management and power. That Jews might have a more sympathetic, like we know what it's like to be
all right.
persecuted.
So is it a collective
immigrants? But
is it a kind of collective unconsciousness, or is it a conspiracy that is being played out in real time?
You call it a conspiracy to say Jews are not the reason why immigrants are coming to the West. That's the conspiracy. Just to say that who benefits, to say Jews benefit from immigration, the continued demographic change, doesn't mean that they're the ones who are causing it. Although Jewish organizations might use.
No, I've not accused them of causing it. I'm asking why they're not interested in teaming up to keep
it benefits. It benefits. Like, what do you understand about that? It benefits Jews. Why would Jews team up against something that benefits them?
Yeah, but it doesn't benefit the average Jew on the street. So
it does.
Like I find it surely not. It doesn't benefit Elliot.
Even your hometown, there's close to no Jews where you live, right?
I guess not. I guess not.
Even the demographic displacement of where you're from overall probably benefits Jews. I mean, saying maybe it's somewhat neutral, but it's saying what advantage is there to Jews?
But the degradation of all society, the degradation of society as a whole, is worse for all of us, surely.
Well,
services get worse, crime goes up.
No, I mean the degradation of society as a whole doesn't affect Jews that much. mean, like I lived in New York, and like Jews have always lived in urban areas, and Jews tend to live in some of the most degraded areas, and Jews even have a way of thriving. That's why Jews have insular communities that protect itself, and also it creates, there's, once it's multicultural, there's no longer a push to assimilate, where it's just like, okay, like historically in the West, like the distant memories really that didn't even exist in my lifetime of when it was just Jews and whites, and like, can't you just be like everybody else? Like, why can't you assimilate to Anglo norms? And so like your average Jew is like, no, I do not want to assimilate to your norms, even if I have to completely destroy your country and support immigration and have all these different type people. I would rather have that than assimilate to your norms. And it's just like, okay, like no Jew could move into your area now, because it's just this like a
Yeah.
homogenous white area where a Jew wouldn't fit in. Maybe like there's a handful of Jews that could white pass and would be able to assimilate into your area, but a Jew wouldn't be able to move to your area as a Jew. But
Hold
like
on, a
it's become,
handful.
once
It's
it
most of them in
becomes
America.
multicultural,
Most of them are.
multicultural, then you could have a Jewish section of your town.
Most of them are white skinned. Even blonde haired, blue eyed. You say this yourself in America.
But but it's saying like just because they could shave and give up their religion, they don't. They're saying that just because they're white,
Yeah,
and so
Orthodox ones don't want. Orthodox ones want to
they don't want to have to
maintain.
assimilate to fit in.
Yeah,
And
okay,
so if
okay,
it's
but what?
multicultural, you don't have to assimilate to fit
That's
in.
not the majority. The majority aren't Orthodox. The majority aren't ones who are worried about assimilating. The majority are ones like Elliot running around thinking,
Even
what the
Elliot
heck's
doesn't
going
want
on?
to assimilate into white culture.
He already is.
No, he's in San Francisco and saying like he might want like to date a white woman or something.
We've already claimed him. It's too late for Elliot. We've claimed him. He's one of us
Elliot does
now.
not want to assimilate into white culture.
He's assimilated.
How is he assimilated into white culture?
Of course he is.
What does it mean? What do you mean assimilated?
He's basically
Part
an
of a
average.
church. He's not part of like
He's
a
one of
white
us
group.
now. We've taken him away from you. He's a goy now.
I mean, you can
Elliot
have
is a
him. I'm
goy.
not trying to. He's already only a half Jew, but I'm saying like, how is Elliot assimilated into white culture?
Because he doesn't go around just like he doesn't go around just going Jew and just
Yeah,
wanting to be
what
separate.
does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be assimilated to white culture? Just because he's
Eat
not like a
burgers,
super
eat
Jew doesn't
burgers,
mean that.
grill, swim at the
Does he go to church?
beach, go for a walk at the beach, do I don't
That's
know,
not white culture.
Buddhism, whatever.
When did he join a church? Is he like part of like the Birch Society? Like, I mean, as far as Elliot, like
Well, we're talking about San Francisco culture here, which is
yeah,
a bit
but there's
weird in
nothing white
itself.
about that. San Francisco is also minority white.
But the culture was defined by weird white people who were like far out man, surfing, drugs, I
Yes,
don't
like
know,
drugs is
gay
white
sex.
culture. Free sex is white culture. Like, no, I'm saying like
No, I mean, well, look,
your
they're
argument is not making,
downstream.
you got to define white
No,
culture.
it's not
You're just
making.
saying, you're saying like
Okay,
sex is
okay.
white
Well,
culture.
tell me how. Okay, then. Well, I'll turn it back on you. Tell me how Elliot is still segregated as a Jew. Tell me how he has not assimilated.
Well, I mean, he's assimilated into probably like a multicultural bohemian,
A
and that's only
multicultural
possible
bohemian.
because it's not like
All right, I might give you that.
If
Okay.
Elliot was in a majority white place like where you come from, there would be multiple things that they would want Elliot to do that he would not want to do. And the main reason why Elliot would not want to do those things is basically because like he's Jewish, he has a different identity, and just like okay, like it's Christmas, like Elliot, like I don't want to celebrate Christmas, or like whatever the various things. Like he would say, I don't want to do those things. I'm not the same as you. I'm different than you. But so he's
Well, we
assimilated.
don't expect him to start, celebrating Christmas.
You would.
Just saying that. I'm just saying
Maybe
that
you
in
wouldn't, but because
general.
you're already urban bohemian. But it's saying like if you were if if you were a Jew in a homogenous white area, those other people you were amongst would want you to basically assimilate completely to all the various things. and anything else we're like, well, why you're different? Well, you're different because you're a Jew, and
Okay,
that's
but it's not that much different. Okay, even if I
It's a
grant you
huge
everything,
difference. It's like
even if I grant
in an
you,
urban area where like what it means to be normal means like surfing or doing drugs. But if you're in like a homogenous white area where like what means to be normal is like everyone goes to the same church or believes the same things or like listens to country music or like the actual cultural things that are significant about being European. Like even Elliot, he's like he's not going to want to do that. He's a bohemian. He thrives he thrives in an urban area where he can just do what he wants.
yeah, but that is a lot of white people now, and I just want to push back a little because look, the whilst like the culture of like San Francisco area is mainly is today predominantly informed by like the Beat Generation and the movement that and the San Francisco Flower Power movement and all this kind of shit that flourished there. This is an out product of white cultural liberalism, maybe in excess and all that kind of stuff.
You're completely
Maybe
wrong.
it.
Like the hippieism, the beat generate was a pushback against white culture. Haight Ashbury, San Francisco in the '60s, even the beat generation, like like Allen Ginsberg, Alan Watts, that was the pushback against white culture, and even the beat generation of the '50s was already multiculturalism. The pushback is like we're tired of white dominant culture, and we're going to create something bohemian. And they started taking multicultural elements and adding to it that was already in the '50s. And when the hippie movement,
What, what was multicultural about it?
that was already of a form of integration of including blacks and Indians and Hindu type stuffs. Like San Francisco was already at the forefront in the '60s of the pushback against white culture.
It might have been a pushback against
I mean,
the
what was the hippie
norms of
movement a
white
pushback
culture.
against if it wasn't a pushback against white culture?
Well, it might have been a degradation. It might have been an
It was a
attempt to
pushback of
overturn
traditional white
oh,
Anglo-American
traditions.
culture.
Yes. Okay, tradition.
That
Okay,
was
I'll give
white.
you
Like
that.
they were pushing back against the dominant white norm of
Yeah,
the
but it
thing.
was mainly white people doing it. I know Allen Ginsberg was a Jew. What are you telling me? It was like some kind of Jewish subversion op, or was it white people who've like gone off, gone off, done too many drugs, and were just like going a bit wild and saying, we're tired of the taboos of society.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you have white hippies and say, okay, they still might have group affinity that you had largely like in the San Francisco in the '60s was still Haight Ashbury was still largely white, but they created something new, and it wouldn't be fair to call that white culture. It was a pushback against white culture, and it became multicultural. It was the same time as the Immigration Act and civil liberties and all the education of the African Americans, and the hippies were the ones who were on the side of the liberal reforms. The hippies were the ones that were on the
So
side of immigration. They were on the side of integration. They were on the side of all the various things that came in the '60s. And that was a pushback against the '50s when segregation was the norm. I haven't We're talking about my mom, like who of that era where you there was a certain point where segregation was the norm, and you have it like call it like the Leave It to Beaver, your '50s white American Protestant culture, and the hippie movement largely destroyed that. After that, you no longer had your traditional white culture. And although like whites were still dominant, so there were still hippies that are largely white or boomers that are largely white, all of those people accepted the reforms of the '60s. All of them accepted that segregation was wrong. All of them accepted that immigration restrictions were wrong. There's no like anti-immigrant hippies.
no, yeah, but all this came way after, like George says. Look, all this came way after. Are you telling me that the culture of like the Beach Boys was Jewish? I mean, this is just
I
like
didn't say it. There was an
this is not
element like.
true.
Well, I'm saying there was an element to like the Beatles. The Beach Boys are kind of like an offshoot of the Beatles, and the Beatles are also a
Good
rebellion.
vibrations. Wouldn't it be nice? Surfing USA.
But I
Fun,
mean,
fun, fun.
just like the
I
Beatles
get
had,
around.
yeah. But I'm saying they also like the music industry had their Jewish management, and but I'm not saying it was necessarily Jewish to. But in the same ways that the Beatles in the UK were pushed back against traditional British culture, they started growing their hair longer. They started questioning traditional moral norms, promiscuity, drug use. And also at the same time, the Beatles accepted immigration and multiculturalism. They adapted like
They were naive.
rock and roll was
They,
the incorporation of African American music. They started growing their hair longer and saying, well, obviously, like the Beatles were created by Jews, Epstein, the people that found them, the people that booked them. John Lennon's famous statement that the entertainment industry is an offshoot of Judaism, and like if it's the Beach Boys, I'm not sure if the Beach Boys were. Uh, I'd have to do my research to know the Jews involved, like the Spectre, the Wall of Sound, and the Spectre. But the same the Beach Boys come shortly after the Beatles, and like Spectre and the Wall of Sound, and it's also largely a Jewish led, at least Jewish supported movement that is pushing back against traditional
my
white
God.
culture that excluded Jews. Like the Beatles came from a traditional area like you did where Jews were excluded. And so at the same time, like the Beatles pushed back.
I don't know about that. Not the Beatles. The Beatles came from Liverpool, bro. I mean, the Beatles
Yeah,
came from
and tradition
Liverpool.
where you had traditional American, British, Christian anti-Semitism, where you had people that were skeptical of Jews. They were skeptical. They didn't like. They had their private places. They had their schools and their churches, and they weren't assimilated. Like you had segregation between blacks and whites, and Jews lived in the ghetto. They weren't assimilated. And then you had multiculturalism, where you had
I
all
don't think
different
anybody in
people.
Liverpool even knew who a Jew was.
Yeah, exactly. And if they did,
Right,
they would
okay.
have
So
had
what's...
traditional skepticism about Jews. That's why Jews pushed so hard to break the monopoly of white culture. That's why Jews supported the Beatles and the hippie movement.
So you're saying that it was an organized Jewish subversion op to break the heterogeneous white culture or of what normal traditional Christian white family values. The Beatles were were a Jewish. Is this your
No,
premise
I'm
that the
not calling it a
Beatles?
conspiracy or organized. It's saying it's just group
What is
conflict,
it then?
where
Yeah, but
all Jews in
so,
the 50s
so
knew what it meant to be excluded from European white culture. Like any Jew in the 50s lived in the Jewish neighborhood, and they knew what it meant to not belong, to feel excluded, to not be part of white culture, and they wanted to create something new. And so, like the Beatles, to call it like a psyop, but when the Beatles came along, they had long hair, and they were trying to create like a New England. Jews backed it and promoted it, just like the Beach Boys or the hippie movement. That they were saying like, yeah, I'm tired of being excluded from these white culture, and if there's some white people that are trying to push forward and don't believe or hold like that anymore, I'll support them. To call it a conspiracy or a psyop is just saying just it was group conflict
okay, okay. I
and
just want to
group
thank.
it's group interest to
All
say
right.
that that I mean, I don't know if you know your history of England, and just saying like
Hold on, hold on.
you
Let me thank
had
George.
areas where just Jews knew like it wasn't you don't
Fucking
belong
hell.
there, Jew. What are you doing here? Like you don't belong here. And so Jews
All
didn't
right.
like that. They're just like, I belong everywhere. I should be able to go anywhere in America. And it's generally these homogenous white Christian areas that Jews didn't belong. And I mean, in the
All
U.S.,
right. Let me fucking thank
you used
George
to
for
have
goodness sake.
neighborhoods that forbid the
Jesus.
sale of property to Jews. You used to have
All right.
clubs that
Fucking
forbid
hell.
Jewish members. So at the time
Okay.
of the Beatles and the Beach Boys, it was still the norm that most European white American clubs didn't allow Jewish members. And it was multiculturalism.
I don't think anybody back then would have been able to identify a Jew if you'd have put them in a lineup, especially in England. But I just need to say thank you to George for using that super chat button that's dangling there right below everybody's nose with a big dollar sign on there. It's begging you to push it. Thank you, George. We appreciate you. He said, by the way, self-hating, pushing Wignat talking points,
I mean,
basically.
no, I mean, like from your view, it's Wignac talking points. Like Kevin McDonald, all he does is quote Jewish sources that take credit for these things, and to say like, and people don't know the history of when Jews were excluded. You can't go back to the 50s when you had homogenous, and you say like, okay, like if a Jew was relatively white and they changed their name, mean, why did all the Jews change their name to Anglo names? Why is everyone in Hollywood or like all these
To
different
assimilate.
to assimilate? Because if they kept their Jewish name, they wouldn't have been accepted. They only were accepted because they hid their Jewishness. They white passed.
Maybe it's
They changed
paranoia.
their
Maybe
name.
it's paranoia. We're very altruistic people. We probably would accept them, but they're like paranoid. They're like, oh my god, these people are always out to get us. We need to like be slippery about it and hide and pretend we're not who we are. And like the rest of actually
I'm
English
saying
people are like probably like we love you Jews or something. Sorry about what happened to you in the
multiculturalism
war.
a new thing, relatively, like saying like no segregation up until the 1950s was the norm throughout the West. Besides, maybe London was bohemian or cosmopolitan, but like through almost all of England, through the vast majority of the United States, segregation was the norm. Jews through 1950, even till today, but like Jews through 1950 almost exclusively lived in Jewish neighborhoods.
Yes, I get that. I get that there's a history of segregation. Anyway, I want to round back to the potential subversion of the hippie movement. So
You're
the
calling it
Beatles get a.
subversion, like it was. You call it a movement, like it
It
was.
was
The
guided
hippie
by
movement
what you're
was the
telling me. It was
movement of
guided by
integration and
Jews.
multiculturalism. No, it wasn't
Guided
guided
by
by
Jews.
Jews.
Well,
Jews
what
just.
then?
I'm not saying like you're going to call it like a conspiracy where like like the Jews got together and created the hippie movement because they wanted to undermine white society. That's a conspiracy. But just to say like homogenous white culture segregation wasn't good for the Jews. The Jews were almost unanimous that they were trying to fight against it. And when the hippie movement rose, Jews supported it. And the hippie movement is largely what in the UK and the US is what culturally ushered in the dominance of the new understanding of America as multicultural nation of immigrants.
Uh, I don't know about that.
Because you're just a kid, you don't know history.
You're saying that the hippie movement was directly responsible for the mass immigration
No, I mean,
movement today.
the political. So you had in the '60s, you had the Hart-Celler, the Immigration Act, Civil Rights Act, and saying that like on a political legal level, it was the acts in Congress or like in the UK. I mean you had legal things that like if the Jamaicans or whatever that those were legal things that decided and saying the cultural what changed to the culture was we'll call the hippie movement, the music, the Beatles. Saying like all of a sudden, the Beatles were pro multicultural. The Beatles went to India. The Beatles thought it was cool to incorporate African American style of music into theirs. The Beatles had long hair. The Beatles were rebellious, and then so on and so on to you have like the Rolling Stones, Brown Sugar Tonight, and Led Zeppelin. When my woman left home for a brown-eyed man, I sure didn't seem to care. Uh, the point where it became culturally accepted, and not only culturally accepted, became culturally the norm. So it's saying like now, something like Led Zeppelin or the Beatles is probably more determinative of what British. I mean, now like they're old people, like even Brits haven't heard of that anymore. But that became the cultural norm that pushed back against whatever people in the '40s or the '50s, whatever John Lennon was fighting against. That's just like the Enoch Powell UK or something. That's just a moment of history. It doesn't exist anymore.
This is almost as bad as like the Super Jew conspiracy. And you can say like you're a dumb guy, you're just a kid who doesn't know history or whatever. But also your perspective on it is that like there's a Jewish hand
No, I
behind
didn't say. I
everything.
didn't say that this is a Jewish conspiracy at all. These were
No,
cultural
I'm not saying
changes
it. I'm
that
not
Jews
accusing you.
supported.
I'm not
Jews didn't
accusing you
cause
of
the
saying it's
cultural
a
changes. They
conspiracy.
supported the cultural changes because
Yes, I
it
get it. I
benefited
get
them,
it.
just
I
like Jews
get it.
support immigration and
Fucking hell, dude.
multiculturalism because it benefits them.
Yes, I get it. It benefits them. They saw it. Your position, again, then tell me if I'm wrong here. Your position, so I can give it back to you, is that they saw disruptive music and culture emerging and they thought, yes, we're going to support this because it's good for us. That's right, yeah?
Well, it's a homogenous European culture that excluded Jews was bad for them. So Jews always saw benefit to multiculturalism, immigration. And he was saying that the hippie movement, the music, these are just cultural signs of the shift towards multiculturalism. And you could do like, I mean, Kevin McDonald doesn't mention the hippie movement in music. He talks about anthropology and these other issues, but just say Jews acted in their own self-interest, and what's in the self-interest of Jews is not in some of these manners is not in the same interest of Europeans, and saying that mainly homogenous European white culture is not in the best interest of Jews. That's why Jews almost unanimously
Okay.
fought against homogenous uh, European white American culture.
But surely it was still European at its heart. This was still an expression of the European people, and that was natural. That naturally came about through our own like instincts and even the excesses of it. Even the fact, like, just rebelling itself is something. We didn't need Jews to make us do it, to make us find interesting riffs in rock and roll and adapt it to our own music and then start dancing to it and find find that this was a freeing kind of experience, and then things downstream from there start experimenting with drugs because they became available, and then write about it, speak about it, make more music, take magic mushrooms and say, whoa man, we're all one, and we're really like experiencing the universe right here, and it's amazing. And we didn't need Jews to like push us down this path, even if they were
Okay, so
like, I
Kevin
know, funding
McDonald's
it,
argument.
realizing that this was going to be popular and they could make money out of it.
What I mean, just say it was the profiteering, or so. And Kevin McDonald's gives the argument that it wouldn't have succeeded without Jewish support, because Jews had certain amount of power and anti-European animosity, and to their benefit to support that. Jews supported it, and had the Jews not had the power and position to support it and supported it, wouldn't have succeeded. And I mean, so that's Kevin McDonald's argument. And say like maybe it would have succeeded without the Jews. Maybe if Epstein didn't find the Beatles or signed them up, they would have still succeeded. Um, I mean, that's possible. And saying like the Beatles, they're not like shadow puppets of Jews. They it's symbolic more of African culture, or I say multiculturalism and taking from Indians and Africans than of Jews. But the Jews just used what we're good at in terms of like finance and management to support it, and it could have succeeded without our support. Like I would tend to agree with Kevin McDonald more that probably it wouldn't have succeeded without the Jewish help, but doesn't mean that it was like a conspiracy of the Jews. It just meant that it would be historical revision. And what if there were no Jews in the West? What if there were no Jews in England? Would the Beatles still have got signed, found, and became internationally recognized? Possibly. But I mean, the fact is, like, no, the Jews were integral in the rise, in the discovery and promotion of the Beatles.
Right. Look, well, I'll give you to your credit. I'm aware of this. Right. This is an actual. So in 1966, Bob Dylan meets John Lennon for the first time in London, and they share a limousine together. And apparently, this is where Bob Dylan introduces John Lennon basically to drugs. There's a clean cut John Lennon. I can't play this, but look it up. Bob Dylan and John Lennon limo scene from Meet the Document 1966. And here they are, and they get stoned in the back of this limousine. Now, but here's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, Bob Dylan, who is Zimmerman,
Yeah.
who is a Jew
Yes.
who had been rejected by whites and changed his name and tried to assimilate into European culture in order to be accepted, he has his own critique of the West and why he's doing what he's doing. John Lennon may have agreed, and I'm not even saying Bob Dylan was necessarily anti-white, but like certainly he was on board with getting America and the West to be more multicultural or more pro-immigrant. And John Lennon largely agrees with that vision, and has different reasons. So he's saying like, like, does Bob Dylan hate traditional white culture for why he does? He might have different reasons than why John Lennon. Most Anglos hated traditional Anglo culture. It was like John Lennon. I'm not saying it was like a conspiracy of the Jews. Like times had changed. There was new technology and various things. So like John Lennon, whatever reason he hated his background and wanted to change it, But yeah, he teamed up with the Jews to do it.
Yeah, like Miami Virtue said, everybody must get stoned. It was one of Bob Dylan. Like a rolling stone. Definitely, I understand. So there is
Your
an
chat, like, or
instinct.
like Luke Ford, this is like Wignat talking points, but it's like no, like this is like Kevin McDonald, like all of his sources are like Jewish authors that take credit for this stuff.
So
And
what you're
even like
telling
as a
me,
Jew, like it's only like to a certain audience where like you like like when the first time I was on Red Elephants and like Vince is like, did you actually just say that Jews support multiculturalism and immigration because it's good for them? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like so what? Like everyone knows that. And then like it's just because you have pushback from certain people and like as opposed to many Jews or people who say like there's a conflict of interest and what's in the best interest of white Gentiles and Jews is in conflict. You have like like the pushbacks like no, absolutely not. Jews do not support immigration and multiculturalism. And any Jew that's like watching you or in the Luke Ford chat, they're gonna push back and you're not gonna accept this kind of
I'm
like
trying.
so obvious. I mean, so you're kind of like that 8 years
Yeah,
ago Vince when he comes on to Brundle's cast after the Richard Spencer and hears me saying, "Oh my God, did this Jew actually just admit that they support multiculturalism and immigration because it's in their best interest?" And so, like, you're still
I'm
like
I'm
you're
trying.
still like
I'm
that eight
trying
years later.
really hard not
You're
to
still
believe in the Jewish
you're still
conspiracy.
wrestling with that 8 years later.
I'm trying really hard not to believe that there's a Jew under every bed.
I didn't
Yes.
say I said that Jews support multiculturalism and immigration because it's in our best interest. I didn't say there's a Jew behind everything. I just said that Jews support multiculturalism and immigration because it's in our best interest. I didn't put that into a conspiracy theory to say that Jews are causing it or Jews are the only ones behind it or there's a Jew beneath every rock.
Yes, I get it. So what you're telling me is that the natural Jewish instinct is to tear down barriers because of previously held barriers which have excluded them from society. So when they see something, when they see this normative white, whether it's Anglo, whether it's American Protestant, whatever, whether it's Catholic, whatever it is, when they see this culture and they recognize, whoa, we're not part of this. This society excludes us. It'd be much better if we broke all these taboos, and this is where Jews get their, like, I don't know, their reputation for being subversive from, but it's like their natural instinct. This is what you're telling me, right?
Yeah, and they say like, okay, well, what about like India and China, and saying it's different because Jews know what it's like to be excluded in the West. Like Jews weren't living in China; they weren't living in China being excluded. Jews were living in England, in America, in the West, in mass, and had experienced exclusion. So when they saw an opportunity to break the exclusion and redefine America, they went with it, or like an opportunity to redefine the UK, they went with it. So it's not just like Jews like okay, like why aren't Jews trying to break tear down China and make them also multicultural? And because like, I mean, really, I mean, like Kevin McDonald lays this stuff all out in the Cultural Critique, and most Jews these days don't remember Jewish exclusion. Like I said, like I've always grown up among a minority of white people. So you got to be pretty old. You got to be like Luke Ford's age or older to remember a period of when Jews were excluded amongst homogenous white culture. Like it's been that long since really homogenous white culture has been a thing. That, but it's saying the older Jews that grew up under it, like the Jew that remembers uh, changing their name. I mean, like now would be ridiculous. Like what person, like what Bobby Zimmerman would have changed his name to Dylan? But I mean, so it was a sign of the times when like 25% of Jews had changed their name to sound Anglo. Like now, like I wear a yarmulke, I got a beard, I got a tzitzis, like like I'm more comfortable than being white. But I mean, so you're talking like really before the hippie movement. Like it's really been over 60 years since you had this homogenous white culture that Jews were excluded from. Even your parents'
Yes.
lifetime, even your parents might not have lived during a time when that I'm okay, like in a small area, but it's saying like that, like that's even before your parents' time.
I have to be honest. This was a fascinating stream where I have ended up defending the Jews, and Doovid has been like telling me no, 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 no. But
I'm not attacking because to me it's a good
No,
thing.
I know, I know,
I think
I know. You see it as a good thing. Yeah.
I
Just a
mean,
minute.
to
I
your
want you to
audience, that's why I'm interesting to like Keith Woods or like, I mean, we get to the alt right or something like that
All right.
to
Well, let me just ask you,
just get into
expound
with
upon that for a
this.
minute because I just have to nip and do something. Can you expound upon that for 1 minute and then I'll be back?
All right. Yeah, I'm saying so. Like when Vince and the Red Elephants like first heard me say that, and he was like, "Oh my god, a Jew actually admitted that," and I was like, "Was this guy crazy?" Like every Jew my whole life has always said this. Like Jewish organizations, Jewish periodicals, Jewish democratic politics, President Biden, Obama, like everyone says this. Like who was surprised by this? And okay, so like Wignats or something who are using it to claim that there's a Jewish conspiracy that like they're saying like the Goyim didn't want this, the Gentiles didn't want this, and the only reason it got pushed upon us was because the Jews forced it upon us or tricked us upon it. So like when I first started debating like the alt righters, that was like a new thing to me. I was like, what, the Goyim didn't want this? Like I never heard that. Like the Goyim didn't like the Goyim were like and I started looking into it, and that's why like after reading Kevin McDonald, see like no, I mean some of these are group conflict of interest and some of them are zero sum, and at this point where whites have basically lost the battle of the demographic change, and that's why the JQ has risen to become so important. um and even like okay, like Doooovid, like like I was never popular among the alt right. I was just someone that they interviewed to get an honest take on the matter of someone just saying my understanding as I saw it. And so like or like Adam Green is still speak to because he focuses on the text or something, but like, oh, here's a Jew admitting it, or here's a Jew honestly, because the Jewish perspective usually comes from like we didn't do it because it was best for us, we did it because it was best for everybody. And saying we didn't do it
Yes.
because we were selfish, we did it because we were selfless. And so like if you're in Jewish circles, like yeah, like everyone's like heard stories of old timers being rejected by whites or the all white clubs, and that like even here in Detroit, like even though there's like hardly any white people left, like if you go with an old timer, it's like, oh, and that place used to not allow Jews, and that place used to not allow Jews, and that place didn't used to allow Jews. And like now that even though a lot of these places now are largely Jewish run, um so it depends on the audience. And
Yes.
like yeah, I agree, like I'm not even saying that Jews were doing it because they were selfish. I mean it comes out that way, just say because there's Jewish interest. And like what to question Steve's point, why don't Jews and whites team up? Because it's not like what's in your interest is not in our interest. Why would we team up with you against something that's against our self-interest? And like so your claim now, you're pulling
For
the
a
Jew,
greater threat.
you're
That's the
pulling the
status
Jew,
quo.
like what's in your
Helps
interest
you.
is in the Jew's interest. So you're doing the same thing the Jews do, where the Jews say like, no, we didn't do it for ourselves, we did it for you, goy. And so now you're saying like, no, we're not, I don't want a homogenous white society because it's for best for what's
I
best
want
for
us to be
whites. I
friends,
want a
David.
homogenous white society because it's
I
best
want us
for
to
the
be
Jews.
allies. I see a bright future where little Jewish boys and little Jewish girls hold hands.
But all the other minorities are excluded. Or just the blue-eyed Jews, like just the blue-eyed Jews. Like if you're not, if, like those guys can hold hands, like they will include them. But
No, they hold hands and walk down
not the Arab Jews,
a
and not any
majority
of the
white
other
street.
minorities.
Jews have never had it so good. This is your peak. You're in danger of losing it. You're in danger of what's happened like over the last 2,000 years where Jews, I don't know. Obviously, I'm just a
But you're
kid.
saying
I don't
Jews have
know.
never had
I
it
don't
so
know
good because
history.
of
I'm just a kid who
multiculturalism.
doesn't know history, but they've had it good many times in the past and then got kicked out of places. And look, in America, they've never had it so good. Why put all this at risk?
But you're saying, but because you have a false correlation. Jews have never had it so good as in the last few decades under multiculturalism, under an America that accepted it was a nation of immigrants. Like in the 50s, Jews didn't have it that good. And that's why Jews are not going to team up. No Jew wants to go back to the 50s.
Yeah, but I mean,
What are you even
the
saying? Like you're saying Jews have never had it so good, even though the demographic battle's largely already been lost for whites. They're saying you're saying Jews have never had it so good because we won the battle for the heart and soul of the West. We won the battle in multiculturalism. We won the battle where everybody now accepts that America is a nation of immigrants. If we hadn't won that battle, Jews wouldn't have it so good.
No, I'm saying you're mistaken about the battles that you have to fight. Basically, what wasps, wasps put Jews on a pedestal, even if they don't realize it. You know, there's even this subset of Protestants who literally believe that, you know, Jews are the chosen people. We have to basically worship Jews like as a religious element. The rest of them just like love Jewish cinema, Hollywood, love Jewish music, like you've been telling me. They
Well, so
adore it. They don't.
exist. I'm saying you're completely incorrect. You're saying no, like now, Christian Zionists, evangelicals put Jews on a pedestal. WASPs do not put Jews on a pedestal. WASPs had a
No, they do without realizing it. They
WASP
love
had a
Hollywood.
healthy element
They
of
love Jewish
xenophobia.
culture.
But I'm saying you're
They
just
love.
like one thing, like WASPs don't even exist anymore. Like the Anglican Church has more black people in it than it does Anglos. Like when Luke Ford's talking about Episcopalians, but like, you know, these days, like the Anglican Episcopalian Church, like they're made up of majority African Americans. If you go in my area to to an Anglican or Episcopalian church, is going to be majority African Americans. That I mean, so like WASPs historically had
Uh,
a healthy dose
all
of
right.
xenophobia and anti-Semitism. You're referring to evangelicals and Christian Zionists that put Jews on a pedestal, but like in the
That's
50s,
the religious ones who do.
but I'm saying
The
the
rest
50s,
of
like
us,
when WASP ran America, there wasn't Christian Zionism or evangelicals was a minority. Those movements grew together. Like I mean, reality is
okay.
Christian Zionism and evangelicalism largely start growing with the hippie movement. So
Look,
no offense, but like
you're
everything you're
no,
saying is
you're
wrong.
talking about the religion. You're
Everything
talking
you're
about the
saying is wrong. Like
religious
WASP
aspect.
do not
No,
put
it's
Jews on a
not.
pedestal.
Half of America.
WASP were the people that excluded
Oh
Jews.
fucking hell!
I mean, you just don't know
Right.
what you're talking about. WASP are the exact people that excluded Jews. It's evangelicals that put Jews on a pedestal.
No, you're talking exclusively about religion. I'm talking about subconsciously, unconsciously, the rest of America who just like adores Hollywood, doesn't realize
WASP did
that
not enjoy
Jews
Hollywood.
are
WASP don't exist anymore. Those are evangelicals.
all of
From the
America had
cultural
loved
shift.
Hollywood. 1980s America loved Hollywood.
That was
Celebrities,
that
A-list
rise.
Hollywood celebrities were like the role models of all young Americans.
Yeah, I mean that's like the era of Ronald Reagan, who was the first evangelical president, the first person that was bringing in the evangelicals into the mainstream. Like Ronald Reagan is, I mean, maybe Richard Nixon, but like that's the beginning of the end of the WASPs.
I take it back actually. Jews peaked in the 1980s and 90s. It's already downhill for you guys. You're going downhill at a rapid pace. The 80s and 90s were like when Jews peaked. Everybody was just blind to the fact that Jews were running Hollywood. Jews were, I know, Zionist lobby this and all that. That was when they were literally the ruling class, sat at the top, unrecognized. That nobody had put on the they live spectacles and seen anything, and they'd blown it.
I mean, here Miami Virtue, there's no way he's correct. WASP are around 25% of the U.S. population. I mean, WASP is white Anglo-Saxon um, Protestants. Like if you look at the church, like even like Episcopalians and Anglicans only make up like 5% of America. Evangelicals make up like 50% of America. I mean, so it's just like some Jews will use the word like WASP to refer to like, you know, like Trump, like Trumpers are WASP, but like that's inaccurate. Like Trump is not a WASP. Reagan wasn't a WASP. Well, like WASPs are historical. Like WASP society was like the 50s society that we were talking about, like that the Beatles and the hippie movement displaced.
Well, whatever.
Like the
It's
old,
just it's just a
old
placeholder for white
private school,
Americans.
country
White
club,
Americans.
and
Okay.
like you probably like I don't probably no one even watching this like knows or remembers this stuff. Like WASPs are like the bad guys in like School Ties with Brendan Fraser. Like those places hardly even exist anymore.
Yes, but there are over
Even in the 80s, those
50% of
places were on the
white
decline. Like even in the 80s, there were
people
hardly
in
anything like that
America.
anymore.
What are you telling me? There's no white people in America. Who the fuck are all the white people then, Doovid? These
No,
are,
there's
they
no.
might not be Anglo-Saxon. Yes, there's German origin ones, there's Italian origin ones, but there's this plus 50% of Americans who are largely Protestants of some kind. That's all we're talking about, this group of people.
No, I'm saying there was for 100-year period, WAFs largely ran America. They had country clubs, athletic clubs, churches, private schools, private institutions. They had neighborhoods that dominated, and that's where like the presidents and the elites, and you had WASPs, law
Hmm.
firms, and banks, where everybody was like white Anglo-Saxon, uh, Protestant, male, and that started dying out in the 50s, and by like the 80s they didn't exist anymore. So like in Metro Detroit, like okay, you had the Detroit Athletic Club, or certain schools, and those were like WAFs, and those were the breeding ground for the elite, and the mayors, and you couldn't get a job
Well,
at WASP
all
firms
right,
that ran
all right,
society. So there's still
screw
white,
the
none
wasps.
of these
I
WASPs.
don't.
There's
All
none
right,
of
we're
these
getting.
WASP institutions anymore. I mean,
Okay, wait.
have you seen School Ties with Brandon Fraser and
No, I haven't. I feel like we're fumbling around on
but I'm saying
details that
these
don't
old like
matter.
elite boarding schools that were like all white and WASP, like they don't exist anymore.
Okay,
They're like
all right. Oh, all right. Well, yes, but there's still plus
just because
50% of
there's still
white
white
people.
people doesn't mean you still have white. You don't have white institutions anymore. You don't have
Right.
these all white institutions that run society anymore, and you haven't
No, and
really
that's
had those
and
for.
that's a bad thing. And that's a bad thing for
Well,
all
it's
of us.
bad for you.
What I want to say,
Bad
what
for
I want
you.
to
It's
say,
bad for the
I want
Jews.
to say, yeah, because you're in decline. You're in decline, and you don't realize it. You people have got your. I don't
There is
know.
one
I've
decline.
got.
I don't even know what you're talking about. Like,
Obviously, we're in decline. Obviously, we're in
I
decline.
mean,
But
it's saying like you're saying the
it's the
Jews are in
scorpion and the
decline.
frog. We're gonna go down together unless we do something about it. You can't see the wood for the trees. You think you're going to middleman your way out of
I
this?
mean, your
It's not possible.
prime minister has like a Jewish wife.
It's
We're
not
not in
possible to
decline. Like
middleman
you're
your
the one in
way out
decline.
of this.
Well, I mean,
You're not going to
like we could have
find
had a
another
conversation.
client group
Instead, you're trying to
as
argue just
amenable
nonsense.
as us, dude.
But I mean, maybe okay, you got your viewership, and it's like Comedy Hour with Stephen James. I mean, your argument doesn't even make sense to me.
The argument is that basically Jews were at the top of society in the 80s and 90s. They were the culture creators of America, even if religion had been, largely put to one side or whatever. They were the creators of American culture. Everybody subconsciously put Jews on a pedestal, and they didn't even have they'd never had the veil of spectacles on to see it all. Lots of that has gone away. There's now, like you
You
say,
think
lots of
everybody put
increased
Jews on a pedestal?
anti-Semitism,
There's just
increased
this one statement
noticing.
here that's so nonsensical. Okay, maybe like Hollywood, Jewish institutions, but like you think everybody in America in the 80s, and you think that WASP put Jews on a pedestal? You think in the 80s, like everybody put Jews on a pedestal?
Yes, unconsciously. In the 80s and 90s, Hollywood was the culture and the music industry was the culture of America.
But I'm saying that was largely Jews that were putting out the media. It wasn't necessarily like society didn't put.
This is my point. You've just made my point for me. Jews were putting out the culture for, and the white people were just lapping it up, and were like, we love this. We love the celebrities and the heroes that you're feeding me, and you're telling me, yeah, it was Jews all behind it,
Yeah, and that's what gave
serving it
rise
up.
to evangelicalism and Christian Zionism.
Well, there we go. So I'm right, and so you never had it that good, and now you're gonna like
No, we
allow
didn't
all
have it.
that
I'm saying
to
the reason
go away.
we created that in the 80s, we didn't have it that good then. That's why we were creating it through media. Like that's like you're saying we didn't have at that point. You still
And that
had
was
the
your
remnants of
peak.
WASP dominance, and at that point, Protestantism and Christian Zionism were still growing movements that were just displacing. Like Ronald Reagan was like the first example of evangelicals displacing WASPs, and so saying that. I mean, some people like Jews will call the golden era of Judaism because there's no anti-Semitism, But like
There
no,
we go.
relatively like Jews weren't in power. Like your first like Lieberman, it wasn't until 2000 until you had a Jewish vice presidential candidate. The number of like Jews in positions of power. You still had
I,
a common. You still had a common acceptance. Like you could
the
never have
problem
a
is
Jewish
never being
president. You could
satisfied,
never
isn't
have a
it?
Jew in like no Gentile would.
Never being satisfied. Yes, we created all of the culture of America, but we didn't have a vice president yet. I mean, oh my God, just like, it's like, stop being so greedy. Just like realize you're at the
I mean, how are you
top
claiming that we were at the
of the
height of
totem
power in
pole.
the 80s, and even saying like today, like the number of Jews in Blinken in the Biden administration is way higher than it ever been ever at any point in history. Even the new Trump administration, the number of Jews in positions of power will be way higher than it was in the 80s under Reagan. Like Reagan didn't have a Jewish son-in-law. He wasn't, putting. I mean, he had a few Jews. You had like Kissinger. You had, neocons. But like, it's nothing like. I mean, the Trump administration is is way more philo-Semitic than Reagan was.
Let me answer. Let me just address this super chat. Kemidov says George Washington welcomed Jews and said watch for link, but unfortunately, I don't think you can post links.
Yeah, I'm familiar. I mean, they
there
put
it
Jews
is.
on a pedestal.
So you don't think that Jews peaked in the 1980s and what about losing control since October the 7th then? Even you go on Albert Bishai's show and talk about this, that Jews have lost, they've like overextended themselves. Now like anti-Semitism is out of the bag. They've lost control of it and they've screwed up.
No, I mean, if you measure anti-Semitism started to vastly decrease in the 50s and maybe went to all-time lows in the 90s and starting to increase. But even the post-October 7th anti-Semitism is still smaller than it was, historical measures like the immigration acts of like the 20s or even common in the 50s. And and then also if you're talking about popular sentiment among the public versus power, if you're looking the difference between like Nixon and Reagan, they say he stopped the Jews, like he was like enough of this, or I'm going to stop the weapons. So saying like now, okay, even like Iraq or Saddam, but I mean the nature of the weapons, the agreement, the vetoes in the UN, all the tens of billions of dollars for the war, the tens of thousands of 2,000-pound bombs, all the fighter jets or something. It's completely unparalleled to the support that the U.S. is giving to Israel to anything in history. Popular sentiment is decreasing.
Popular sentiment is decreasing. People are noticing. Anger is out there. Your multicultural coalition has basically risen up. They're rising up, saying these people are white colonialists. You're being called white colonialists.
They're rising up against U.S. support for military support for Israel. They're not really rising up against Jews. I mean, even all these people, even though some Jewish organizations will insist, but like all of these people emphatically insist that they're not anti-Semitic. You're even opposed to like if you compare like Pat Buchanan or something like that, where even he like generally pushed back against accusations of anti-Semitism, but like even if like Pat Buchanan is like, fine, I'm an anti-Semite. Like it's like no one today, from like your left, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, to even your right wing like Nicholas Fuentes, or like will emphatically push back. I'm not an anti-Semite, as opposed to like in the 50s where it would have been a norm. Like, yes, I'm anti-Semitic. I do not want those people in charge of me. I do not want those people living in my neighborhood. Certainly, those people cannot be trusted in any position of power. So, I mean, that's just the way the Jews are hyperbolic about the language of the current situation. You're like, oh, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar are, but
it's not just them, is it? It's students. They're rising. Anti-Semitism on campuses. All these
according to the Jews,
Palestinians.
But that's according to the Jews. There's not like a rising group of. Well, there is some rise. Like now, you have some rise of people that will accept the label as an anti-Semite. Like if you're looking, like historically, you might have had 20% of Americans would have been fine being anti-Semitic. Like, yes, I'm anti-Semitic. I don't like these people. I don't want them in the country. I certainly don't want them marrying my daughter, living in my neighborhood, so on and so on. So like these days, like very few people will openly accept the label of being anti-Semitic, and they'll push back. They'll be like, "No, I'm just against what they're doing to society or their influence or Israel." Um, I mean, you're just accepting the Jewish organization's language of of it as opposed to I mean, that's what I always said. Like, well, like if Keith Woods was an anti-Semite, why wouldn't he just accept it and say he's an anti-Semite? Why would he reject it if he isn't? And then if you look back in, they say like the '50s era uh, West, where
Well, I can tell
where
you.
you had people that they would have accepted the label, of like, yes, and I'm anti-Semite.
Well, I can tell you because anti-Semite, just like Islamophobia, it implies something irrational. It means you just hate for no particular reason. And that is not what someone like Keith Woods believes. They believe that they have real reasons, real disagreements, real disgruntlements. You can disagree with it. You can think that he's crazy and conspiracy theory led, or that he's correct, but whatever. But he is making substantive points in his own mind about either Jewish or Israeli overreach and influence. And so he
I mean,
believes that it's
he's not
based upon information. It's not just irrational hatred.
a basic norm of segregated Europe in the West in the '50s was, I don't want these people in my neighborhood. I don't want them in my schools. I don't want them dating my daughter. I certainly don't want them in positions of power over me. And that was almost normative, where like your typical European Gentile would have expressed, like, in terms of desegregation, like like Germany in the it was like, should we allow Jews into the university? And you would have overwhelming people like, no, I don't want these people in university. I'm pro segregation. And to that level of what was normative, even Keith Woods, I don't think would express that level of what would have been normative anti-Semitism and the acceptance, where people would have just openly like, yeah, that's how I feel. That
No, it's a low IQ to accept being called just a racist or an anti-Semite or Islamophobia, and to walk in to
Yeah, but
these
you're
kinds of
strawman
labels.
supremacy. So I didn't say like like you say like just to say like I don't want these people, but because segregation has already died out. So I mean, if Keith Woods or someone like that, he wants to return to segregation. I mean, it's tough to say because segregation is so far away, and how would you even get back to it? Where he's just saying like immigration restriction, he doesn't want people in the charge, or he's recognizing there's a group conflict, and the Jews are pushing society in a direction that's contrary to his interests. Um, it's much more difficult in already because multiculturalism is already won. As opposed to when you had homogenous white areas, and they could have, should we let the Jew in? And you would have had, maybe even a majority who would be like, no, let's not let the Jew in.
So how would you describe Keith Woods?
I don't know. I mean, saying he's a white advocate and anti-immigration, um,
Is
nationalist.
he rational? Is he irrational?
I mean, he's pretty rational. Like, I mean, he's extremely
He's pretty
rational.
rational.
I mean, he doesn't appear like I was saying. Like, he doesn't appear full of hate. Like, Pat Buchanan wasn't a hateful person. Like, even if Pat Buchanan, some people dispute, but let's say Pat Buchanan accepted the label. Like, yes, he's an anti-Semite. He accepts the label. He still wasn't a hateful person. It was more just like, these people are different. They have a different way of life. Their interests are counter to our interests.
Miami Virtue points out that places like Birmingham in the UK are not becoming multicultural, they're just becoming Muslim. We're creating Muslim havens within our own societies that are vastly segregated. These places are, they're these places are actually the hotbeds of anti-Semitism, Doooovid. Of real anti-Semitism.
To some, I mean, not really though, because like Muslims always have this like protective status of the Jews. I mean, like to some extent, like they're anti-Semitic, but like
Oh, come off it. Did those people on paragliders have protective status of the Jews?
yeah. So like if you're
It's these type of people that we're bringing
if you
in, by the
ever
way.
okay, like I go to mosques, I go to like I'm in these spaces with Muslims, and even though like the Western propaganda, you're like Iran, Hamas, they want to kill all the Jews, not just Israel, every single Jew. But like anytime you actually speak to them, like they always will make an insistent point, like I'm not anti-Semitic, I love the Jewish people, and like, but these guys are the fake Jews or just the Zionists, and like like I've been to so many mosques and so many anti-Israel events with Muslims, and they're always telling me how much they love the Jews, and like even the spaces, like I did a stream that with this speakers corner Russia, uh and even like Zobita. I do extremely well with Muslims. Like most Muslims like have it's like philo-Semitism is part of the Islamic religion. So even these people that are at war with Israel,
It's part of Christianity too.
that's like the Adam Green. um Islam and Christianity are controlled opposition. Like why like everyone, why did Hezbollah and Syria
Oh
and
god,
Assad
this.
lose to Israel? Because like, well, Islam is controlled opposition. Like, because Islam substantiate that the Jews are the chosen people. Like, they just have an argument like, oh, these aren't the real Jews, or like the only problem with you is you're not really following your law. Like, I love and respect the Jews. I don't know if you remember that debate between like Joseph Cohn and Abdullah Andalusia.
No, I didn't. I didn't. I don't. I can't watch Joseph Cohen.
Okay, I mean, have you heard of like the Abdullah Andalusia? I mean, he's one of the biggest UK
I
guys,
have not.
or even like Muhammad Hijab. Uh, any of these
I'm
guys,
aware of Mohammed
they
Hijab.
always open up with how much they love and respect the Jews.
Yeah, sure they do. It's called. Yeah, somebody said it in the chat. It's called kissing your ass. If I go to buy something from a Muslim shop, they tell me it's the best thing in the world, and
No, I mean, it's
really, they're
because
robbing me.
philo-Semitism is a part of Islam. Like any serious Muslim person, even like Iran or Hamas, they're gonna always start with the key element. Like they love the Jewish people, and the only problem is like they're not the
All
real
right
Jews.
then,
They're not really
explain
following
Iran.
the law.
Explain Iran, and if that's true.
I was just watching Trigonometry the other day, and they had this like anti-Iranian dissident, a former Iranian, and like he was asked like, "Well, Iran, they want to kill all the Jews," and she's like, "No, no, no, like we protect the Jews, we love the Jews." That's just like Western Zionist propaganda, and saying like, well, I'm saying like, yeah, there's war, like we're killing each other, there's hatred, but like relatively Muslims, yeah, like you could go and like I was it's like Christian anti-Semitism. Um they have stereotypes about Jews in the Quran, but they also have pre-programmed philo-Semitism. And so, like,
I get it. I
I,
get
I would
it.
I would
But the
almost guarantee,
hatred.
like
I get it.
if me and you went to any of these London areas, like
Yes. You'd be more
I
scared of
really
me.
I would probably fare okay. I would, and even like I would go to a mosque. I go to a mosque all the time. I even go to anti-Israel events. I went to events with Hamas supporters, and I've spoken to people who support Iran and Hamas, and they've told me how much they love the Jews. It's just that
Yeah, I get it.
the
You
Jews are not
lean in.
following their law. It's just that these are bad
You,
Jews and they're not following their law.
lean in to your non-white traits, so I get it that you can fit in with these people and look the part and play the part and do
Are we really going
around.
to waste the whole time with you trying to convince me that anti that immigration and multiculturalism is bad for the Jews? That's the only thing you want to talk to me about. I mean, we could argue
Who?
this point, but it's,
Yeah, everybody's loved it. Everybody's loved it. It's been a good conversation.
and I don't even know if is that like the new talking point of like going back to like the frame games, like basically Halsey, bring on Halsey and get the Halsey alt right back together.
No, I mean, I was just putting the point. I thought I'd put it in an interesting way to look forward as to if Jews are so smart, why don't they wake up, smell the coffee, and realize they can save their position as the current ruling class of America by securing the white demographic
Yeah, he just
who loves
pivoted.
them
He
still.
gave like cultural differences. He didn't really answer the question. So I actually answered your question and saying because
You
we have
did.
the difference of what's in our best interest, And even though multiculturalism and continued immigration is bad for you, it's actually good for us. And then you're pulling the Jew by arguing you want to convince me of what's best for the Jews. Even though like I've grown up and like I've been to I have in my YouTube
Yeah,
channel
I want I want Jews
immigration rallies.
I
I
want
know
you
even
to
my
see
Orthodox
reason.
right wing Jews are all pro immigration and multiculturalism. Even my right wing rabbi, like was speaking on behalf of like defending Muslim immigrants in our neighborhood. But yet somehow you're going to convince me that immigration and multiculturalism is actually bad for the Jews. I don't even think Halsey would agree with you.
So why is someone like Halsey then
Maybe
advocating?
Elliot. Maybe I don't even think Elliot. I mean, Elliot
Wait,
in the chat
let's
would
ask.
control a little bit, but I don't even think Elliot would agree with you.
So why are there obviously are even everybody here in the chat will agree there are good Jews, Doovid. I mean,
Yeah,
why
man.
is
So
it
just
that there
because
are
Jews support
people
multiculturalism and
like
immigration, you're
Halsey,
going to
there
claim
are
that makes
people.
them a bad Jew. Like I say, there's good Jews, but they're Jewish, so they support multicultural immigration. It's against your
Yes, I get
interest.
it.
But you're saying that makes them a bad Jew. Like if a Jew supports multicultural immigration, to you that makes them
Okay,
a
I'll
bad Jew.
reframe that. I'll reframe that. What I was saying is that there are people on the dissident right who look and they think for us there are good Jews and there are bad Jews. There are Jews working against our interests and there are Jews working for our interests. So I want you to explain to me why then, if it's bad for Jews, sorry, if it's good for Jews, that America loses its white demographic majority status. Why are there people like Halsey who are opposed to it? Why are there people like Stephen Miller who are opposed to it? Why are there people like what's his name who basically created the alt right, gave rise to Richard Spencer? Why do they disagree?
Well, there might. Okay, there's very few Jews that are anti-immigration. If you look like Stephen Miller,
Stephen
even
Miller.
Halsey, like Halsey, his main issue was, I mean, he was somewhat neutral. His main issue wasn't anti-immigration, and even Stephen Miller, like he still supports legal immigration. And the question, like whether Stephen Miller actually cares about maintaining a European, uh, I mean, he has some element. Like he could be anti. There's a lot of racist Jews. There's a lot of Jews that don't like Mexicans or Arabs or various things. But like like I would guess even Stephen Miller, um, Bloomberg, your typical Republican Jews, they all support legal immigration, right?
Stephen Miller explicitly worked to end chain migration. He's trying to reduce most migration.
Okay, but I mean it's unclear. Like to say if you're going to be the
All right, but
spokesman
it's
for
clearly
Stephen
not
Miller,
supporting the multicultural project, is he? Otherwise, he'd be like, he just wouldn't be doing it at all. He's clearly anti.
no, I'm saying like Stephen Miller, whether he's pro-white or not, like he has his reason. Like he's the anti-immigration. Um, I haven't looked that much into it, but I would doubt that he probably still supports legal immigration. Maybe he wants to get rid of chain migration, and I would still probably guess that he's probably leaning towards anti-racism and multiculturalism. But
Yeah,
even if you
I
have
don't think
like,
you have an argument. I don't think you have an argument for this.
what you're an expert
Stephen
in
Miller
Stephen
is
Miller,
clearly. No, I'm not, obviously, but he clearly is
I mean, you're just arguing to
anti-immigration.
argue.
He's clearly anti-immigration. You're just saying, whilst he's saying you don't have an argument. You're saying whilst he's
He's
pro, what?
anti-illegal because in America, illegal immigration is so large and so under the even Obama, but especially under Biden,
Everybody has to be pro
you've had
legal
illegal. But it's
immigration.
saying Stephen Miller is only anti-illegal immigration.
Well,
It's
that's all
unclear. I'm
that's
not so
within the
sure that
Overton
Stephen
window.
Miller is even anti-immigration in general. He's only anti-illegal immigration.
So what
If,
you
if
say?
you if
So,
you have evidence or knowledge, that's as far as my knowledge of someone who follows the United States. I do not know Stephen Miller to be anti-immigration. I only know him to be anti-illegal immigration.
yes.
And
So
maybe he
the
wants to end
evidence
chain
is
migration
he
also, but I don't think
yes, chain migration.
relatively. I would say overall, compared to like the Birch Society or alt-righters, that Stephen Miller is actually probably more on the pro-immigration side because he still probably has no problem with legal immigration.
Stephen Miller wanted to end chain migration, therefore that means that he's against people like bringing all their families here. He's obviously against the multicultural project.
How do you
Otherwise, he
know?
wouldn't.
Obviously, just because okay,
Otherwise, he'd just shut up about it. Otherwise, he'd just shut up and stop attempting to
well, there's two main issues.
affect the
So it's
stopping of
like
it.
Stephen Miller to say like you could end illegal immigration and you could end chain migration, and you would still have hundreds of thousands of immigrants, maybe millions of immigrants coming to the U.S. every year.
Yeah, but everybody has to be for legal migration. That's just within the open
No,
window.
no, anti-immigration would
Yes.
imply that you want to end. I mean, there's levels. So if you talk like if you're actually interested in the European demographic majority, you would also want to end legal immigration, or you would want to revise immigration to favor people based on race, nationality. I'm sure Stephen Miller is more concerned with education. I mean, he's probably a civic nationalist who cares more about education and economics than race. I mean, are you honestly claiming you think Stephen Miller is a white nationalist? You don't think
No, obviously. No, obviously, but I think he's. Are you
you don't
telling me
think
I can't
Stephen Miller
find a
wants
single?
to
I'm
still
not
bring
going to
in.
be able to. Is your position really? I won't be able to find a single Jew in America who is anti-immigration.
No, I mean, sure. Like, there's millions of Jews, but you're not going to find a single Jewish organization, and I'm not even sure Stephen Miller is a good example to say, like that he's actually anti-immigration. He's just anti-legal immigration, and he wants to have immigration reform, but he's not actually anti. In whether the question of whether, I mean, I remember from from Luke Ford when he said when he was interviewing people, he said like it's Stephen Miller because he's your fake, uh, your controlled opposition because like still why can't you have like an actual John Birch Society member? Why can't or I'm not sure why can't you have like Jared Taylor and even like Steve Bannon? Why was Steve Bannon cut out of the administration that Stephen Miller's in? uh, or Sebastian Gorka or something like that. Like probably Sebastian Gorka is substantially more pro-white and anti-immigration than Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller's in because he's more moderate. He's only anti-illegal immigration and chain migration, immigration reform, but he's still largely pro-legal immigration.
Wait, didn't Stephen Miller create that organization that explicitly advocates for white people, that explicitly like sues against anti-white?
I don't know. I'm not expert in him, but I'm saying, I mean, so it's kind of pointless to talk about him as an
Okay,
example. But
let me address
if
this. Let me explicitly say thank you for this super chat to Ricardo Williams. Thank you very much for the super chat. He says, Merry Christmas. The Doooovid's multicultural coalition of based Republicans is ascendant.
Yeah, they're saying like
That
you're
is-
saying that the Jews have it way better
That is an
under Trump
interesting point.
than we've ever had it under any point in the history of the United States.
That's what you're saying, is it? Or what?
Yeah, but I would just if you look at like positions of power, your rhetoric, support for Israel, and even in terms like the Trump coalition is about to uh, ban anti-Semitism, like in like even in the '80s, like you like you couldn't complain about like Ricardo, like you had, like what he was saying, like your base black guys, like you had the right to be racist. So like in the '80s, it was like E. Michael Jones, like okay, like I got like people made fun of Jews, like it was okay to laugh at Jews and to make racist comments. Like now Trump is already, it's just like okay, you're part of the club, you have a little bit of power, but of course we're going to tease you for being Jewish. And like now, like Trump is going to be, like using the full force of law to crack down on anti-Semitism.
Look, my position is that you can't see the wood for the trees. You're being reckless as a group.
Me?
I'm not saying that there's no. In a weird way, David, aren't you self-refuting? You're telling me that like Jews all over are basically against white interests in a way
I'd say
that it's
again,
almost impossible.
there's just what's in the best interest of Jews is not
Yeah, it's
in the
again
best interest of
against
whites,
white
most
interests.
specifically multiculturalism and immigration. Not necessarily like Jews are completely anti-white, but in terms of specifically multiculturalism, immigration, there's not going to be any compromise in that. Like, Jews are going to keep on pushing multiculturalism, immigration, in on the Republican side too, and the Conservative Party. Like even in the
And yet there's people like
even
you who
the
are like
Conservative Party.
anti-Zionist. Why are you an anti-Zionist Jew then? Why are you going against the grain on that particular point and basically supporting all the Wignats and the very anti-Semitic
How I
Palestinian
support just because
cause?
I agree with the Wignats on a few positions. I'm not
Well, yeah,
supporting.
it's basically lending support to it. You go on like Albert Bishai's Twitter Spaces and like agree with all
There's
the
almost
rabid
no white people
anti-Semites.
on Albert Bashai's Twitter Spaces. Like
Yeah,
75.
they're all brown anti-Semites.
I mean, they're anti-Zionist, but I was saying like, I mean, Wignats are almost non-existent. Besides the fact, like like I spoke with Arvold the other day, a few weeks ago, and like we also had this point, and I mentioned immigration. I actually reached out to Keith Woods on his Twitter after he had that big space about his new book on nationalism, and I just said, like, he didn't seem to appreciate that, like, for minorities, immigration and multiculturalism is zero sum, and for most white people, they're not going to see it as zero sum. That like it's very easy to rally up Jews or even blacks, Hispanics, and just be like, we have to fight these immigration restrictions. We have to fight for multiculturalism because this is like a life changing, altering battle. If we lose this battle, we'll lose our stake in the country. We're in danger. As opposed for whites, it's very difficult to put it at the forefront as a zero sum battle that they're going to fight for. Um, but I have almost no interaction with the Wignats. Like when I was with Brundlefly in streaming, that was really the last time I had interaction. Occasionally, people reach out. I'll have an occasional conversation. Maybe when we're streaming, if you think like the majority of your audience is Wignat, but I mean, just like I basically say yes to everybody who's asked to speak to me over the last few months. It's been
Yes.
I reached out to Arvul
No, I
in
commend you for it.
conversation, but it's been
100%
mostly
do it.
Muslims that I've spoken to, and like I said, like Albert Bashai, like definitely minority of the people there, and Albert Bashai is a perfect example because he's an anti-racist. Like when people come and start talking about white this and that, like he bashes them. He'll kick them from the space.
Yeah, but isn't he because he's not white himself, basically, yeah.
Well, I mean, he's Egyptian, but
Well, there we
in
go.
either case, they're saying like, okay, so that's like the case of like, okay, like, well, maybe the Muslims coming into the London are a little bit anti-Semitic, but it's somewhat the
A
dividing.
little bit.
Well, I mean, question like, but it's like, yeah, they're just a little bit anti-Semitic, but like generally, they're still going to join the multicultural coalition, and it's still good for Jewish interests. I lived in Brooklyn that at one point would have been Anglo. So that when I lived in Brooklyn, there were basically zero Anglos. There were Poles, there were Italians, but besides that, there weren't really like regular white people. They're just Poles and Italians, and they're Hispanics and then Arabs. Like there were hundreds of thousands. Like the Orthodox area I lived in Brooklyn was literally right next to the largest Arab section in the United States. There were hundreds of thousands of Arabs. There were mosques. There were women walking around with hijab. Even like the imam that was the Trade Center bombing, the first one was at the mosque that was like literally like a quarter of a mile from where I lived. And you could say, well, yeah, these people are a little bit anti-Semitic, but like no, like most like we had relatively good relations. Even like Golders Green. Or Stanford Hill, like they're right next to the Arab areas. Like occasionally Jews get beat up or there's protests, but relatively the redefining of the UK as multicultural is definitely outweighs the limited anti-Semitism or violence or crime caused by
All right,
immigrants.
screw the anti-Semitism. What about the loss of living standards, the loss of the impeccable society that Western societies had produced, the potential loss of innovation, the detriment of everything, the trash everywhere, the can't
But
you
I mean,
see it? Don't you care about these things?
no, but I was saying like, well, one thing like whatever that was, it
Oh,
excluded Jews anyways.
I'm
Like
getting to that, Steve. One
we're
sec.
not gonna mourn. It was just like God forbid with Ricardo when the Notre Dame was on fire, and the first thing I said was something about like karma or something about like anti-Semitism. Like the Notre Dame is burning, and thinking well they're anti-Semitic anyways, but it's saying like like Jews
Oh
are
my
not going to
god.
mourn for a
Oh my
society
god, bro.
that excluded them, and a lot of the innovation it's continued like the university like the Indians like you've been replaced like you're not innovating and we don't need you to innovate because we're gonna bring in like Chinese and Indians to innovate in your place.
This is like I plugged in the Wignats version of a Jewish rabbi just to I don't know, be make as many anti-Semitic talking points as possible. Look,
These are philo-Semitic talking points just because you're
no, they're not. You just said we're not going to. Basically, you just said we're not going to mourn for a society that excluded us, and that was my first thought when the Notre Dame was on fire. I mean, holy
no,
shit,
I don't have
bro.
like I'm using my face like people that can find my name because I'm saying the majoritarian like you're the one who's hiding your face in your name because just because there's some Wignats like, oh look, it's a Jew who's gloating that we beat you, that we turned your society into a multicultural thing, like and like that, like oh like I have to be scared that like I'm going to increase anti-Semitism because I'm gloating about how we beat you.
I said forget about the anti-Semitism part of it. I mean, that is evident, in my opinion. That is a product of the multiculturalism that you're bringing in more people who are going to be a much less compliant client state. But I was saying just the loss of living standards, the reduction of the quality of life in Western societies. Western societies were amazing. And look at, we've imported the third world, we're becoming the third world, and you're like, well, it's
I
it's
live
still a
in Stanford,
benefit.
still pretty good at saying even in Stanford Hill, living
Ugh.
like there's maybe been a slight uptick in crime or trash in the street, but like generally no, I don't think living standards are decreasing that much. You still have things being built up, and I mean, like, no, I don't see. I see myself as philo-Semitic in this sense, not anti-Semitic. Like, you could have a few people, like Luke Ford, or a few people that are like, oh, you're supporting anti-Semitic tropes by admitting that Jews benefit from multiculturalism or immigration. That's like, like I said, like Vince and the Red Elephants on Brundlefly, close to 10 years ago, and just laughed at it. Like, no, like I'm not worried about that. Like, yes, like okay, like I'm persona non grata among my fellow Jews for being anti-Zionist. I'm not worried about a single Jew listening to this and hearing Doovid's gloating about the Jews won the battle and now we have immigration and multiculturalism like that. Like I'm not going to get any
Yeah,
pushback
and
from my fellow Jews from saying that.
no, because you're already an outcast amongst
I'm
Jews,
not outcast
isn't
because
it?
I'm anti-Zionist, not because of admitting that Jews
Right.
favor multiculturalism. Like I know my area. Like
Well, no,
only
that got you into
only
trouble.
Jews in
That got you
America.
into
Immigration
trouble.
is still the single most important issue to Jews in America. Like our local federation of the local Jews,
Come
like
on.
immigration is still the single most important issue for Jewish activism.
We both
It's
know that
anti-Zionism where
we
I cross
both know
the
it
line.
got you into trouble. That Cohen guy dragged you in front of his panel for 3 hours and grilled you about your motives.
Did he did not question me once about any of my statements on multiculturalism and immigration. If you remember, like 2 hours, he questioned about like Zionism or the management class. There was at one point where he questioned me about saying like, well, you claim that Jews support multiculturalism immigration. Like, you play back the video, like no Jew has ever questioned me besides for like maybe Halsey or a few people in your chat. Like Joseph Cohn, that was
I
not one of
guess
the
I'll have
questions
to.
he asked me was about how dare you say that Jews support immigration and multiculturalism.
I'll have to look. I'll have to watch that back. But isn't it the case that really Dude, there are more people that you're afraid or whatever. You think it'll be better to like, it will be in Jews' interests to reduce the white demographics, but white people, you have more friends amongst like Wignats and white people than you do amongst even your own kind now.
I have almost no white friends in real life, and I'm not like you're putting it like I'm not
Well,
saying
people
I want to
people
call
who
it
give
a
a
bad thing
shit
for
about
white
you
people.
still.
I'm
People
saying that the
people are
more
interested
immigration
in
and
you.
multiculturalism benefits Jews, it doesn't benefit white people in general. It's a conflict of interest. The reason why it benefits Jews is not necessarily because it hurts you. There's alternative reasons why Jews want America to be seen as a multicultural nation of immigrants, and your average white person does not want America to be seen as a multicultural nation of immigrants, and saying that it's just a legitimate conflict of group interest.
What I'm saying is Jews don't care about you. Jews have excluded
I
you.
didn't say
The
that
only
it's not because Jews don't
constituency
care
that
about
still
you.
gives you time are the like the Wignats, the Keith Woods, the and I guess some anti-Zionist Muslims.
It's not because Jews don't care about you. It's just that Jews care that they think you'll survive. You'll handle it. I'm sorry, white
No, they
guy.
don't care about you. They don't care about you. You should put your cause with the white people.
Me, like I don't. I live in a black area. Like how am I? It's not even feasible for me to put my lot in with white people.
If you and I went for a walk to Speaker's Corner, who would you be more afraid of stabbing you? Me or like one of your Muslim friends online?
I generally not overtaken by fear, or I would just have generic precautions of. I don't think it'd be necessarily racially based or based like just.
Oh well, you're not as smart as I think you are. Then I mean, come on, you should be obvious to you who's least likely to stab you between me and that Jabida or whatever her fucking name is. Look, I would just want to say thank you to Ricardo Williams for saying Doooovid is making bogus statements about the origins of the Brundle cast. Luke had zero involvement.
What the hell is he talking about?
Blessings.
The Brundle Claus was a spin-off of Luke Ford. Like his whole audience were people that heard of him on the Luke Ford. Like, how can you say Luke Ford had zero involvement? All of your original guests, were guests that were on the Luke Ford podcast. Your whole audience came. You were like the co-host. He was on Luke Ford every night, and then he started doing his own show. That's like a definition spin-off. I mean, just be like who's like the Vernon Shirley saying that they have no involvement with Happy Days. It was a spinoff. It's 100% spinoff. Like, how the hell could you claim that your spinoff of the Luke Ford show had no involvement from him?
Kemendov say simplistic, categorical statements from Doooovid. Thank you for the super chat. And Rabbi Judas Try, black-pilled Hebrew guy, said, "Hail Rabbi Doooovid Shy." Now,
God, how come Luke Ford got zero super chats for you and Doovid's gotten you some big bucks?
real. This is the question that we need to know the answer
Okay, I mean,
to.
because
That's
Doovid's real. Like, I'm just calling it like I see it, shooting from the hip, and I'm not, like trying to.
It's been a good show. It's been a good show.
I mean, I guess
This,
you're. I mean, maybe people wanted you to argue. They wanted Stephen to try to argue
Yeah, they
why
did.
immigration and multiculturalism is bad for the Jews. Of all the things we could have talked about, like, you were arguing on behalf of like the
Well, look, what people didn't want, what people
hypothetical
didn't
based
want.
Jew
Look,
that
I'll be
doesn't
honest
even
with you.
exist.
I'll be honest with you. What people didn't want is they didn't want you to sit down and give some kind of history lecture about Judaism for, an hour or something like that. So we had to do something spicy. So,
So at least get the Beatles and the hippies and the Jewish.
I still think that was an interesting thing. Right, the Kremlin has sent 50 pence, okay, to ask to divert the attention onto Alexander Dugin. What is his take on Dugin?
I don't know much about him. Did he just have the debate with? I think I watched him, but I'm not an expert in Dugin. Like generally, I'm more on the Russian side than Ukraine side, but I'm not pro-Russian. And I've heard a little bit about Dugin. I think Dugin just had a John Mersheimer. If that was like the debate conversation with Mersheimer and Dugin, I did watch that. I mean, like I kind of like Dugin as an intellectual, but I'm not sure, like I agree with him or know enough about Eurasianism to have opinions on that. And in general, I'm pretty pessimistic about the West. I heard you saying that yesterday. Like I still think the United States is going to split up. That just because there's not enough cohesion keeping us together, and like the deficit or all these various factors. So I would probably be sympathetic or just appreciate Dugin's intellectualism, even if I disagree with him on various issues. Kind of like John
All
Mersher.
right.
I'm pretty sure that's who I saw recently. Dugan had a conversation with John Mersheimer.
Oh, really? Oh, my God. That makes me think even less of Mearsheimer. Dugan is basically an anti-white guy who believes that, I know, America is the great Satan, the eternal Anglo, perfidious Albion, all of this bullshit. And it's basically anything to tear. Basically, I guess it's, I don't know, kind of similar to what maybe Jews are interested in doing. Tearing down hegemonic white society.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I see Miami Virtue. I do live in the Jewish area. It's just the Jewish area is predominantly black. So like that. Like there's not enough Jews to have a Jewish area that is like maybe it's 20% Jewish. So my area is like 20% Jewish, 50% black.
Wowzers. I bet it was better in the 80s or 90s when Jews peaked.
I mean, there might have been some elements, but like it probably wasn't better for Jews.
Maybe. Anyway, David, we've done 2 hours. That flew by like nothing. I think we should bring the show to a close. I want to thank you for coming on SJJMAS. It's been real. Do you have a song that you would like to sing for our audience tonight?
Yeah, I could always chant. I mean, you want like a Western song, like a rock song, something, or you want a.
Would you like to sing a Christmas carol?
I'm not even sure I know. I mean, I probably know Christmas carols, but no, not really. I've been watching. Like, I found this woman, Virgin Rock, and like the classical musicians' interpretation of rock songs. And like this weekend, she focused on like Led Zeppelin, and like at a period where I liked music, I did like British rock. Like I definitely like Alan Parsons, Supertramp, Led Zeppelin. But if you want something Hebrew, like I could always pop in a good Hebrew chant.
Anything you wish we've been asked for a musical outro from people. The Christians, I understand, done Christmas songs. If you want to do something that's kosher, that would be wonderful as well.
Okay, I had this one in my mind earlier this morning when I thought we would stream. Baruch Hu Elokeinu Shebaranu Likvoidoi. Blessed is he, the God that created us for his glory. Shehivdeluni Minatoyim, that separated us from the deniers. Shanasamanu es Torah Semes, and gave us the Torah of truth. V'chaya oilam nasam bitokenu, in order that we could have eternal life. So blessed the God that gave us the Torah to separate us from the Gentiles. Baruch Hu Elokeinu, Shebaranu Likvoidoi. Baruch Hu Elokeinu, Shebaranu Likvoidoi. V'hi delanu minatoyim, nasalanu Torah Semes. V'hi delanu minatoyim, nasalanu Torah Semes. V'chaya yoilam, v'chaya yoilam, v'chaya yoilam nasan b'socheinu. Nasan Bisochenu. Okay, Steve. Happy New Year's, happy holidays, blessings. Nice to bringing it for the debate, trying your best to put the fire on Doovid. If you want to talk or chat again, um, I gotta say from like even though we streamed and your streams were pretty popular, no one from your audience really migrated to my content, which is kind of like a sign. Like people are interested in
Yeah,
Judaism, interested in these
yeah.
debates, but like no one who watched that was like, let me watch what Duvid's doing. Let me try to speak to Duvid, which is somewhat a sign about the difficult relation between the white Jewish coalition. But you brought the heat and you're doing good. And I'd like Colin Lidell's defense of what you're doing. Like there is demand, and you can see the audience. Like there's strong demand for strong white people to stand up for your own interests, and there's also probably strong interest for the white Jewish coalition. But the problem is you'll get dissident Jews who want to join the white Jewish coalition, but you're not going to actually get mainstream Jewish support. And just because you have Jews that have joined your coalition won't save you from the accusations of anti-Semitism or them trying to dox and ruin your life, God forbid.
Well, Doovid's channel and his X account are linked in the description. I recommend you go and sub to both of those. Doovid is a character, absolutely, and is involved in many debates. Whether or not I think some of your other material is a bit impenetrable, Doovid, when you do your intellectual stuff. So that is basically whether people are interested in it or not. But absolutely go and sub to Doovid. And I still maintain I have a dream that one day little white boys and little Jewish girls will join hands. I have a dream today, Doovid.
Okay, well, God bless. Good luck. You can move into the multicultural area, and I'll be nice to you. But anybody reach out, you want to talk to Doovid has generally said yes to everybody who's ever asked to speak to me or to stream or DM. I usually don't have that big of a following, so I will reply. And now it's now Stephen J. James is so much more popular than Doovid. He's basically doing me the favor of just talking. Doovid's starvation, attention starvation. It's like, oh, thank you, Stephen, for putting me in front of a crowd, because no one wants to talk to Doovid anymore. But so Doovid has just returned to my lonely, intellectual, scholarly, and returned back to my pathetic life before Luke Ford brought me to the attention of the counter-Semites so that I could help them with the Wignat talking points.
Blessings, Doovid, and Merry Christmas, everyone. Thanks. Oh, and Iconoclast tomorrow night for SJJMAS. Don't forget, be here, everybody. Okay. Good night, everyone.